You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi everyone, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. It's a new year as I release this episode, and I know at this time of year lots of you are thinking about lifestyle changes and your plans for the year ahead. So I thought in this episode I would share with you a chapter from my book Job Free about a particular kind of lifestyle choice, a particular way of achieving more financial freedom. I wrote the book Job Free after interviewing lots of people who've achieved financial freedom in different ways. And as the subtitle of the book says, the book is about 4 ways to quit the rat race and achieve financial freedom on your terms. So the way that I achieved financial freedom was through creating a startup, founding a business, growing a business, eventually selling it. But I know that route is not for everyone. And so I wanted to explore in the book different ways that you can also achieve financial freedom. And one of the ways that I talk about in the book is called extreme saving. And that's the chapter of the book that I'm going to share with you in this episode. Even if you're not an extreme saver and that's not the lifestyle that you want to pursue, I think that this is a really interesting lifestyle choice and it provides lots of food for thought. So I think you'll find it interesting to hear about the people who do pursue this lifestyle choice. If you're interested in reading my book, Job Free, you can get it on Amazon. It's available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook format, and on Audible too. And I'll put some links in the show notes if you want to get hold of the book. Before I play you the chapter, I just want to say a big thank you to my new patrons, Bruce S. and Doug C. And I also want to tell you about some relevant bonus episodes if you're interested in this episode today about extreme saving. Patrons are supporting listeners who make the show possible. If you're interested in becoming a patron, you can get access to an ever-expanding library of bonus episodes. I've already released 59 bonus episodes, and I'm bringing out more all the time. And a lot of those bonus episodes are about financial independence, which is very relevant for today's topic. Lots of my bonus episodes are about answering questions from patrons, and financial independence is a topic that patrons are very interested in. So you can get hold of a lot of bonus episodes that are highly relevant if you're interested in financial independence. I go into a lot more technical detail in bonus episodes than I can on the main podcast. For example, the previous bonus episode that I just released was about minimizing taxes on investments. And the next one is going to be about the pros and cons of mortgages. There's lots of other bonus episodes that you'll find interesting if you're pursuing financial independence, covering topics like real estate, international investing, the permanent portfolio, precious metals, cryptocurrency, and many other topics relevant for those interested in financial independence. So to find out more, you can click on the link to my Patreon, which I'll put in the show notes, which you can access on your podcast player. You can also go to my website, thevoluntarylife.com, or directly to my Patreon page, which is at patreon.com/thevoluntarylife. So without further delay, here's a chapter from my book, Job Free. Chapter 1: Extreme Saving. There is a dignity in the very effort to save with a worthy purpose. It produces a well-regulated mind. It gives prudence a triumph over extravagance. It gives virtue the mastery over vice. It puts the passions under control. It drives away care. It secures comfort. Saved money, however little, will serve to dry up many a tear, will ward off many sorrows and heartburnings which otherwise might prey upon us. Samuel Smiles, 1875. Joe Dominguez's story. Joe Dominguez was born in Harlem in the 1930s. He made it to Wall Street, where he got a well-paid job as an investment analyst. He used his high income to save as much money as he could. By the age of 30, he had saved the equivalent in today's money of over $400,000. At that point, he quit his job and lived from the interest on his savings. The interest income was modest, but he made it work by maintaining an extremely frugal lifestyle. He did not have any of the high roller spending habits that you might expect from someone with a career on Wall Street. In fact, he made it his life's work to show others how saving and frugality could help them achieve financial independence. Joe never worked for money again after he quit his Wall Street job. He used his financial freedom to devote himself to projects that he found fulfilling. Together with his partner, Vicky Robin, he wrote a best-selling book called Your Money or Your Life that explained his approach to achieving financial independence. All the profits from the book went into a charitable foundation with a mission to provide financial education for ordinary people. Joe died from cancer in 1997 at the age of 58. Imagine what a different life he would have had if, instead of retiring early, he had continued to work on Wall Street. If he had pursued a more traditional Wall Street career, he might have spent his remaining 28 years amassing a bigger and bigger fortune and spending it on the momentary pleasures of a consumption-oriented lifestyle. Instead, he spent those years doing what was most fulfilling to him, enjoying life, spreading the message of financial independence, and helping millions of people to free themselves from financial worries. Which life would you prefer? Although he did not use these words, I call the approach that Joe pioneered extreme saving. This chapter explains the extreme saving strategy for achieving job freedom. How extreme saving works. Extreme saving involves a 6-point strategy. Number 1. Get a decently paid job. Number 2. Adopt frugality as a central part of your lifestyle to enable you to save the majority of your income. Aim for 75%. Number 3. Begin investing your savings as soon as possible to allow maximum time for compound interest and capital accumulation to work in your benefit. Number 4. Minimize investment costs by managing your money yourself and using low-cost investment vehicles. The lower your expenses, the higher your investment returns, and the more to compound. Number 5. Minimize taxes by using tax-deferred accounts and any other legitimate minimization techniques. Minimizing taxes also gives more chance for compounding to work. Number 6. When you reach the point of financial independence, quit your job and live from your investments. Here's a way to summarize the lifestyle of extreme saving. As you progress in your career, don't increase your consumption. In other words, as you earn more money, continue to live like a student. Then save all that additional money in a tax-efficient, low-expense way. The key challenge for extreme savers is to stick to a lifestyle that allows them to save a large proportion of their income. If you can stick to the saving, the remaining steps are relatively straightforward. Employment and extreme saving. Unlike other approaches to living a job-free life, extreme savers usually work as full-time employees for many years. It makes sense for them to hold full-time jobs because the strategy requires a steady accumulation of savings, and a job can give you a steady income to save from. Most of the extreme savers I have interviewed were full-time employees during their income-earning years. Justin, an early retiree who writes the blog Root of Good, is an example of someone who used full-time employment as a means to early retirement, not as a source of fulfillment in itself. During the accumulation phase, he protected his free time outside work in order to gain fulfillment from family time and personal projects. Here is how Justin explained his approach to me. Quote, I was kind of picky in terms of my career because I didn't want to work really hard. I wanted to have plenty of free time, but I think I was also smart in the sense that I made decisions based on a bigger picture of what work is for. We had a business relationship. They paid me money in exchange for me doing awesome things for them. And so I focused on making sure that I was compensated appropriately, and when it was time to go somewhere else and get rewarded, I made that choice. Unquote. Many other early retirees use full-time employment as a source of their savings. As previously mentioned, Joe Dominguez was a full-time employee. Jeremy and Winnie, who write the blog Go Curry Cracker, were full-time employees during their accumulation phase. Jacob Lund-Fisker is an early retiree who runs a blog called Early Retirement Extreme and has also published a book of the same name. He is a former academic who was able to achieve financial independence in his 30s by saving more than 75% of his university income. Amy Decision is another example of someone who took the intensive saver approach based on an employee income. She published a newsletter in the 1990s called the Tightwad Gazette, now available as a book. Amy was a homemaker with various side projects that brought in income, but her husband was a full-time employee. As a household, they saved money based largely on his salary. When they got married in the early 1980s, they had only $1,500 in savings. In 7 years, they had 4 children and saved $49,000, all from one income, which at the time was under $30,000 a year. Pete, who runs an entertaining blog called Mr. Money Mustache, is another early retiree who used full-time employment as his income vehicle. He worked as a tech industry employee and retired in his early 30s. He lives from investments he accumulated using extreme saving. How important is your income level? The higher your income, the easier it will be to pursue extreme saving. Many of the extreme savers I have interviewed were in relatively high-paying jobs in technical fields. Pete from Mr. Money Mustache, Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker, and Justin from Root of Good were all engineers. However, this strategy is not limited to those with high-paying jobs. Mike and Lauren are a husband and wife team who run a website and YouTube channel describing their journey to financial freedom. They are on track to reach financial independence by the age of 30. They are pursuing this goal without the benefit of especially high-paying jobs. Mike and Lauren described their background to me. Quote, "We never received any inheritance or even a major bonus or anything at work that would have contributed a significant chunk. We both just have regular full-time jobs. We earn around $60,000 a year combined. That's with 2 full-time jobs, and we both have side projects that we're working on. The median household income in the United States is somewhere between $50,000 and $55,000, so we're just normal earners. This is definitely something that normal people can do." End quote. We live in such a high consumption culture that there are always opportunities to be more frugal. Many savings measures will have no impact on your happiness. We could all save more money and still have a fulfilled and enjoyable life because the predominant lifestyle is so financially inefficient. Saving the majority of your income. Extreme saving involves significant lifestyle changes. The approach requires saving the majority of your income on an ongoing basis. At a minimum, you save 50% of your earnings. Ideally, you save 75% or more. Given various assumptions, if you save over 50% of your income and could live sustainably from the remaining amount, then you could retire in about 16 years. If you save 75% of your income, then you could retire in about 8 years. Jeremy and Winnie, the husband and wife team behind Go Curry Cracker, used the approach of extreme saving to reach financial independence over the course of 10 years. They are early retirees who spend their time permanently traveling. As they explore the world, they share their experiences and a breakdown of their financial expenses on their blog. When I interviewed Jeremy, he described their 10 years of saving. Quote, "During that time period, we were saving upwards of 70% or so of our income. Then, in the last couple of years, our portfolio was basically supporting our lifestyle, so 100% of our after-tax income was going into our savings. The straight-up math of it works out that if you are doing a typical 10% savings rate, you need to work 9 years before you have enough put away to fund 1 year of your current lifestyle. Whereas, if you're saving 90%, then after 1 year of work, you've saved 9 years' worth of living expenses. Something pretty magical starts to happen in the compounding when you get above the 50 to 60% savings rate." End quote. Lowering expenses provides easy wins. You can increase savings both by increasing your income and by reducing your expenses. The easy wins for savers usually come from reducing expenses. Therefore, once they have a reasonable income in place, extreme savers tend to focus more on reducing expenses. You have more control over expenses than you do over income. Your pay partly depends on factors outside your control, such as the profitability of your employer's business or the economic climate. In contrast, your personal expenditures are entirely within your control. You can choose to be more frugal with your spending without needing any action on the part of your employer. The higher your income level, the more effective will be lowering expenses compared to increasing income. As you increase your income, it becomes harder to minimize taxes because you move into progressively higher tax brackets. You can mitigate tax increases to a certain extent by using tax-deferred accounts, but this also locks up your money. Thomas J. Stanley studied first-generation millionaire households in the United States for his book The Millionaire Next Door. His research led him to conclude that spending choices are more important than income for developing wealth. Quote, "People think that as long as they generate high incomes, wealth will surely follow. Nothing could be further from the truth. It so happens, in fact, that for the purposes of building wealth, once you are in a high income bracket, it matters less how much more you make than what you do with what you already have." End quote. As an employee, you may be required to take on more job-related expenses in order to increase your income. Working for someone else may also involve spending time away from your family or other pursuits. Most importantly, making more money will not increase your wealth at all if you simply spend it on more consumption items. Gaining conscious control of your spending, therefore, matters more than increasing income. Many extreme savers prefer to focus on minimizing expenses rather than increasing income, as this gives them more control and freedom of choice. Justin from Root of Good described his approach to getting more income versus saving more. Quote, "In terms of the day-to-day, I always wanted that 40-hour-per-week job. I didn't want to have a long commute or lots of travel, so my income probably suffered because of it. But that little extra bit of money that I could have made probably would not have made a lot of difference in terms of happiness long term. I put more effort into saving money, economizing where I could, researching purchases, and that sort of thing." End quote. Frugality not only helps you increase your savings rate, it also decreases the target amount of savings that you need for financial independence. As you reduce your living expenses, you reduce the amount of wealth needed to live from as an early retiree. I provide an overview of the technical issues regarding this subject in the appendix about investing. Key expenses to target for saving. Extreme saving is not about agonizing over every purchase. Rather, it is about having a sustainable strategy for saving on the biggest ongoing expenses. If you know where your money goes, then you're able to prioritize your cost cutting to those areas that will give you the most benefit. Extreme savers focus their savings efforts on those expenses that tend to eat up the biggest part of a budget. As Mike from Mike and Lauren explained, there are 3 major areas where the bulk of your spending is probably going. It's going on your housing, your transportation, and your food in that order. Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker described how he and his wife Winnie adopted the same approach to prioritizing. Our main 3 savings approaches are what give people 80% of the benefit. It's where most of the money goes, between housing, transportation, and food. Housing. Most people could achieve big savings in their housing expenditure because house choice has become a vehicle for the expression of social status and lifestyle aspirations. Everyone needs a decent shelter in a location with access to amenities. Housing provides this, but it is also a bucket for a lot of discretionary spending beyond such basic needs. That discretionary spending often goes into buying larger properties, but it can also go into remodeling kitchens or other kinds of upgrading. Extreme savers don't use criteria like social status when choosing their homes. Instead, they think of a house as simply a consumption expenditure. As with all other forms of consumption, they try to spend as frugally as possible. Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker described how he and his wife's housing choice helped them save. Quote, "While many of my co-workers were living in 3,000 square foot homes that were being paid for with a large mortgage from dual-income families, we were living in a 900 square foot apartment in a 1930s era building. I don't feel like we lacked anything because we weren't in a 3,000 square foot house. If anything, we didn't have to paint, we didn't have to mow the lawn. If we spent 90% of the time in several hundred square feet, why heat and cool and maintain the other several thousand that some Americans live in? So our costs were substantially less than those of our peers." End quote. I followed a similar approach when it came to my own housing choices. I lived in a small studio apartment until my late 30s. I always rented and did not own any property until after I'd sold my business. I never had a mortgage. One consequence of this choice was that I was able to use the money that I saved on housing to invest in my business. Transportation. Transportation is another expense category that offers big opportunities for saving. In particular, finding alternatives to a car is a great way to improve your finances. A car is an expensive purchase that begins depreciating the moment you buy it. It sits unused most of the time, but requires constant spending on fuel, road taxes, maintenance, parking, and other expenses. Some people see the purchase of a nice car as the reward they can give themselves for all the stress and hassle of being stuck in a job they dislike. In contrast, extreme savers view transportation as a logistical problem and the ownership of a car as merely one possible solution to this problem. If they need a car, extreme savers will opt to purchase a $5,000 used car rather than a $60,000 new luxury car. Thereby, they make immediate savings on the initial purchases and pay far less for tax and insurance. Many alternative forms of transportation are more economical than private car ownership, such as using public transportation, riding a bicycle, or even joining a car club. Many extreme savers deliberately choose to live in locations that will enable them to rely on public transportation or, even better, walking and cycling. Here is how Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker described his strategy for transportation. Quote, "Transportation-wise, we very actively found the apartment where we lived. We were a block from the grocery store. We were across the street from a weekly farmer's market. We were 5 blocks from the public library. We were on a main thoroughfare for public transit. I could walk downstairs and get on a bus that would take me to the office. We didn't have a car, and most days I commuted to work by bicycle." End quote. If you live in a high-density town or city, you can consider going car-free entirely. I have deliberately never owned a car. I avoid all the hassle of parking, maintenance, taxes, insurance, and the host of minor errands that go with car ownership. I get more exercise by walking, and I can always rent a car if I need one. This is only possible if you deliberately choose to live in a place that has good transportation links and a dense network of streets. However, I consider walkable neighborhoods to offer the best quality of life that urban living affords. Far from being a sacrifice, I see not owning a car as a positive lifestyle choice. Food. There is a huge opportunity to save money on food expenditure by not eating out as much. Eating in restaurants is another example of an expenditure that can feel like a psychological reward for all the hard work that you do in a full-time job. After working hard all day, the temptation is to treat yourself by going out for a meal at a restaurant in the evening. Annual restaurant visits per capita in the US rose from 153 in 1991 to 178 in 2001, suggesting that people were eating out every other day on average. Another example is the small eating out that most employees do every day when they get their lunch from a takeout restaurant or cafe. Paying for lunch seems like a negligible cost, but such expenses add up, and can have a big impact on your annual expenditure. Extreme savers cook for themselves and thereby save on these expenses. Jeremy from Go Curry Cracker told me about how he and Winnie changed their spending habits on food. Quote, "There was a period when Winnie was working through a French and Italian cookbook, and we got to the point when we thought, why go out to eat when we are having these amazing meals at home for a fraction of the price?" Winnie's cooking skills rival many Michelin star chefs. Over the course of a few years, she invested in that and decided, I'm going to make great food at home for a reasonable price. End quote. Extreme savers and taxes. Extreme savers try to minimize their tax burden by using tax-sheltered savings accounts whenever possible. There can be limits to this approach depending on the laws in your country. Most governments limit the amount of money you can put into tax-sheltered accounts each year. There are also limits on the total amount of money you can shelter from taxes in a retirement account. These limits are also subject to change over time. For example, the UK lowered the maximum tax-free amount for pensions recently. You may not be able to rely on tax-sheltered savings accounts as part of your extreme saving strategy in the future. Tax-sheltered accounts do not give employees as much flexibility to minimize taxes as entrepreneurs have through business ownership. One obvious problem with retirement accounts is that you usually cannot access your funds until you reach a minimum age, which varies by country but is usually in your mid-50s. If you plan to retire early, say in your mid-30s, then you have 2 decades in which you might not be able to access the majority of your funds. There are sometimes legitimate ways around this constraint. Joshua Sheets is a former financial advisor who now runs the Radical Personal Finance podcast. He told me about a technique used in the United States called a backdoor Roth IRA. Using this technique, you may be able to withdraw some of your US retirement funds earlier without incurring additional taxes. Consult your accountant or registered tax advisor in your own country to get advice on how the most recent tax laws apply to your circumstances. In short, the use of tax-deferred accounts limits what you can do with your money. These limitations can involve removing access to your money for many years, as is the case in most countries, or reducing access significantly but not completely, as is the case in the US. Locking up your funds in retirement accounts limits your flexibility and your ability to use your resources. The power of compound interest. The success of the extreme saving strategy is not solely based on saving a large amount. It also depends on utilizing the power of compound interest. Your first saved money earns some interest. Then, both the initial capital and the interest together earn more interest, and so on. It compounds. Many people are unaware of the power that compounding interest has for increasing your savings. As an example, if you save $3,000 every year from the age of 21, then by the time you are 65, you would have contributed just over $100,000 into savings. However, if those savings were earning 8% as investments, then with compound interest, your amount saved would have grown to over $1 million. Intensive savers take advantage of compound interest by starting to save early in their careers so that the compounding has more time to work. They also save as much of their income each year as they can, so there is more money to compound. Extreme saving and investing. Economic conditions have changed a lot since Joe Dominguez retired early using extreme saving. Most of his early retirement occurred during the long boom period of the 1980s and 1990s, which now looks like a golden age for retirees. He was able to put all his savings into treasury bonds and live from the interest. We live in very different times. Central banks the world over are forcing interest rates to artificially low levels. If you were to follow Joe's investment strategy in these conditions, you would probably not make enough money to cover the ravaging effects of inflation. You also can't rely on the stock market to return the enormous profits it did during the 1980s and 1990s. Extreme savers have adopted various alternative investment portfolios in response to changing market conditions. Although there are different schools of thought, most extreme savers adopt some form of passive investing portfolio for their investments. This approach is summarized in the appendix. One common aspect of investment strategy that extreme savers agree on is the importance of minimizing investment costs. Such costs can significantly lower your returns in both good and bad markets, so efforts to save on these expenses are worthwhile. Most intensive savers manage their investments themselves and use low-cost index funds instead of actively managed funds that charge high fees. Extreme savers use various guidelines to calculate when they have saved enough to be able to live from their investments. One of the most important guidelines is known as the 4% rule, which I cover in the appendix. Once extreme savers have built up enough money to live from their investments, they can retire early and do whatever they want with their time. Things to consider about extreme saving. Extreme saving is probably the lowest risk strategy for achieving a job-free life. If you have the discipline to implement the lifestyle changes, you can become financially independent in about 10 years. It's a much more straightforward strategy than becoming an entrepreneur. You don't need to address the challenges of creating a profitable business. You just have to hold down your job and do the saving. The downside of this approach is that you probably need to stay in a job for perhaps a decade while you save, for the reasons explained in this chapter. If a job-free life is your goal, then this is certainly a disadvantage. I have always found entrepreneurship far more enjoyable for the personal freedom it gives me. If you don't mind working for someone else for 10 years, perhaps this doesn't matter to you. It's worth considering the consequences of a heavy reliance on retirement accounts for investment purposes if you want to pursue this approach. As discussed, this creates practical problems for early retirement because it limits your access to your money. It also reduces your flexibility to change plans. Should you decide that you would like to start a business after all, you may not have the flexibility to access your funds. Relying on retirement accounts as a key part of your investment strategy opens you up to sovereign risk. Governments have a habit of stealing money from pension funds when state finances are tight. For example, Argentina confiscated $3.2 billion of private pension savings in 2001 and $30 billion of pension fund assets in 2008 to fund current spending. This problem is not limited to Argentina. In the last 6 years, governments have confiscated private pension funds to some extent in Ireland, Poland, France, Bolivia, Hungary, Portugal, Bulgaria, and Russia. In the worst-case scenario, you might work a lifetime to build up your retirement savings only to find that your funds have been confiscated by a bankrupt government. Of course, bankrupt governments are a risk to everyone, but the extreme savers are more reliant on retirement accounts than people following any other strategy for escaping the rat race. If you want to pursue this approach, you have to trust that your retirement funds will still be there when you need them. Further resources on extreme saving. If you would like to learn more about extreme saving, here are some further resources that I recommend. Podcast episodes. You can hear the interviews mentioned in this chapter in the following episodes of The Voluntary Life. Episode 162, Spend Little, Save More, Travel the World. Interview with Go Currycracker. Episode 164, We Plan to Retire at 30. Interview with Mike and Lauren. Episode 166, Retired at 33. Interview with Justin from Root of Good. Episode 209, Tax Strategies and Financial Freedom Part 1. Interview with Joshua Sheets. Books. I suggest Joe Dominguez's original book, Your Money or Your Life, as a good introduction to extreme saving. The later edition by his co-author Vicky Robin is more relevant for contemporary economic conditions. A more recent book, Early Retirement Extreme by Jacob Lund-Fisker presents an updated approach to extreme saving. An out-of-print book by Paul Terhorst called Cashing In on the American Dream may be of interest if you want to read an early example of extreme saving with a high income, although the investment examples in the book are all very out of date. See also the appendix for more resources on the investment side of extreme saving. Websites. Jacob Lund-Fisker has a website where you can connect to other extreme savers. Mr. Money Moustache also has an active community at his website.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you like this podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Your support will help to grow and improve the show, and you'll get access to a treasure trove of rewards, including bonus episodes. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to learn more.